So, why do young people commit crime? I mean, it's a huge question, and there's definitely no easy answer. But what if we could tackle it by looking through two completely different lenses? Today, we're going to explore a couple of powerful, competing theories that try to explain youth crime. One blames the very structure of our society, while the other, well, it points the finger right back at us and our reactions. Let's put them head to head.
Here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with a real-world puzzle about youth crime. Then we're going to unpack our first big idea, which is strain theory. After that, we'll move on to its rival, labeling theory. We'll see how they stack up against each other. And then, and this is the really cool part, we'll see how they might just fit together.
Okay, let's ground all this in something real. Imagine a government report lands on your desk. It's showing a pretty serious spike in youth crime, especially in cities. Now, it hints that economic hardship is a factor, but it also says that, hey, maybe the way we police certain communities is part of the problem too. This is the exact kind of messy, complicated situation that these theories were built to untangle.
All right, let's dive right in with our first perspective, strain theory. This one is all about the big picture. It asks us to zoom out, to look past just the individuals, and instead focus on the structure of society itself and the incredible pressures it can create. So, this idea comes from a sociologist named Robert Merton, way back in 1938. The core concept is actually pretty simple, but it's really profound. Society basically holds up this one big goal for everybody. Get wealthy, be successful, have that high status. It tells every single one of us to climb that ladder of success. But here's the catch. It doesn't give everyone the same ladder. For some people, the rungs, like good jobs or a great education, are just missing. And that huge gap between the goal and the way to actually get there, that creates this intense tension, or what Merton called strain.
So you might be asking, how exactly does this strain lead to crime? Well, Merton breaks it down for us. Step 1, society sets the goal. Step 2, the legit ways to get there are blocked for a lot of people. Step 3, this creates some serious pressure. And step 4, some people adapt through something Merton called innovation. And no, he doesn't mean they go out and invent a new app. In his world, innovation means finding new, illegitimate ways, like crime, to achieve that goal of success that society told them to chase in the first place.
And boom, this brings us right back to that government report we were talking about. Strain theory gives us a pretty direct explanation for why we might see higher crime rates in places with more economic hardship. When the legitimate opportunities just aren't there, the strain gets higher, and that pressure to find an alternative, maybe criminal, path to success gets a whole lot stronger.
But, it's not a perfect theory, for sure. Critics have some good points. First, it kind of assumes we all want the same things, money and status. But what about crimes that don't make you any money? Like vandalism. And it doesn't really get into who gets to decide what's a crime to begin with. Plus, and this is a big one, it really struggles to explain why two people in the exact same tough spot might make totally different choices. Why does one person turn to crime while the other doesn't? And that last question, who gets to decide what a crime is? Well, that's the perfect bridge to our second theory. Labeling theory basically flips the whole script. Instead of looking at these big social structures, it zooms way in on our day-to-day interactions. And it asks this really radical question. What if crime isn't about what you do, but about how other people react to what you do? Okay, so here's the core idea from a sociologist named Howard Becker. He argued that no act in and of itself is naturally criminal. It only becomes a crime when a group with enough power, think police, courts, politicians, successfully brands that act, and the person who did it, as deviant or criminal. So the focus completely shifts from the act itself to the social reaction. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. There's this key distinction between two types of deviance. The first is called primary deviance. This is the initial act, right? Maybe a teenager shoplifts a candy bar just once. It's not who they are, it's just something they did. But if they get caught and society slaps the label thief on them, that reaction can trigger what's called secondary deviance. This is where the person starts to see themselves through that label. They internalize it. It becomes their identity, and it can become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, leading them into a whole deviant career. And here's a perfect real-world example of how this plays out. A study by Sikworel found that justice isn't always blind. He saw that police officers' decisions were often shaped by their own stereotypes. So they were way more likely to apply that delinquent label to a working-class kid for doing something that, if a wealthier kid did it, might just be dismissed as boys being boys. That label, it isn't applied equally to everyone. Of course, labeling theory has its own problems too.
It can feel a little deterministic, as if just getting a label automatically seals your fate, and you have no choice in the matter. And, maybe most importantly, it doesn't really have a good answer for that primary deviance, like why did the kid shoplift in the first place? And some critics say it kind of downplays the real harm that some crimes cause by focusing so much on the reaction instead of the act itself.
So we've got two really powerful, but totally different explanations on the table. Strain theory is looking at the whole system, while labeling theory is looking at our interactions. Let's put them side by side and really see what each one brings to the fight.
Okay, this table really lays it all out. Strain theory, on one hand, is focused on social structure and blocked goals. It's fantastic at explaining why someone might commit a crime to make money. But its biggest weakness, it pretty much ignores the power dynamics of who gets to define crime. Now, labeling theory, on the other hand, is all about that societal reaction and power. It's brilliant for showing us how the very idea of deviance is created by society. But its weakness, it just can't explain that first act.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's not about picking a winner. It's not strain theory versus labeling theory. The most powerful way to understand this stuff is to see how they can actually work together.
Think about it like this. Strain theory can give us the why behind that very first act, the pressure, the strain from having your goals blocked. That might push a young person into committing that first act of primary deviance. Then, labeling theory kicks in to explain what happens next. It shows how the reaction from society can trap that person in a label, sending them down a path to a full-blown deviant career. See how they connect?
And that really leads us to our final, most important point. Crime is not a simple thing with one single cause. It is a super complex product of both the big picture, societal pressures that create strain, and the small-scale, personal interactions that create labels. You absolutely need both of those lenses to see the full picture.
Which leaves us with one last massive question to think about. If we actually want to reduce youth crime, where should we put our energy? Should we focus on fixing the big societal structures that create all that strain in the first place? Or should we focus on changing our own societal reactions that create these life-altering labels? The real answer is probably both, and that's a lot to chew on.